And through that campaign I was on a panel like this about a year ago, after which people came up to myself and the other panellists, and they were saying or asking, what can I do? How can I make a difference? Through that campaign that I was in, I found myself on TV and on the radio, and also as an expert witness at a board of inquiry. And I'm telling you that not to show off, but because it was surreal and kind of hilarious, because I just thought of myself as a Kapiti housewife, to be honest. It's through that I realised that any one of us actually has the ability to speak truth to power if we feel passionately enough about something. And that's what these fora are about, is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things to speak up against the things that they feel passionately about. So today's panel, we have Dr. Jeff Sluker. I'm not going to explain who the people are, because if you do a bit of research on any one of them, there's a myriad of facets to them, so I will allow them to explain that themselves, if that's okay. Dr. Sapna Samant and Councillor Guru. Now, we've also got Gayleen Preston coming, but she's stuck in traffic, so hopefully she'll just sneak in later on. When Janet, the director of Mahara, and I were putting this forum together, we were looking to run it with an artist who overtly used their artwork to speak truth to power. And actually that was a lot harder to find than you would think. But we found such an artist in John Foster, whose panels are on the wall, and also in Peter Healy, whose works are in the other room. John's daughter explained to us in this panel, Requiem, a tribute to war. That's what John wanted to do. In the background are photographs depicting the realities of war. And then you'll see that there are 5 bullet holes with famous paintings showing war. And then in between those 2 layers are death masks symbolising the, millions of people that have died as a result of war. And what he said was that art tends to glamorise war, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to really show the realities of it, and I think he's done that. He used his artwork to speak up against, as Peter Healy, the other artist, said, those that want to destroy actually everything. So each speaker will have 5 minutes to talk about what they did, and I will be yellow carding at 4 minutes and red carding at 6 minutes. So just in the interest that we want to hear from every single one of you. So that's the way I've decided to do it. And then we'll have 10 minutes with a question to the panel that I would like to know, and cross-panel discussion, and then half an hour at the end for you to ask your questions. So I just ask you to hold your questions until the end, and we will probably go over time, so if you want to make your way out quietly at 1 o'clock, that's just fine. 2 o'clock. Sorry, 2 o'clock, thanks, Liz. And each speaker will talk about how they got involved in their particular issue, what motivated them, where they started from, who they met along the way. And also, as I was putting the fora together, I realised there are 2 umbrella topics under which all of the environmental, social, cultural, political injustice sits, and that is the growing inequality gap and climate change. So each speaker is going to talk within the context of those 2 umbrella issues, and then they will also give each one of us ideas about how we can each speak truth to power. So thank you for coming, everyone. Dr. Jeff Sluker, would you like to kick us off?
Kia ora. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for coming along. 5 minutes, I don't know what to say in 5 minutes. But just really quickly, I'm a political anthropologist, associate professor at Massey University in Palmerston North. I have a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley, and that's where my background in these kind of issues comes from. My supervisor was the world's leading authority on social inequality, and my doctoral dissertation was a study of popular support for the Irish Republican Army and the Irish National Liberation Army on the Falls Road in Belfast during the war years. There's been 15 years of peace process. The war ended in 1994. But in my doctoral dissertation, what I learned was that what we were being taught in the media by the globally British-dominated media was not correct, that the Irish Republican Army were not a terrorist organization who terrified their own populations into submission. This goes, that immediately set me in conflict with facing power, speaking truth to power. The dominant global issue to this day is that the Irish Republican Army were a nasty, terrible terrorist organization. Simply, the facts do not bear that out. So that gave me that immediately set me on a path of confronting power, so to speak. And from that, I took an interest in studying terrorism because I understood that the whole construction of this idea of terrorism is a propaganda construction. It's one of the most dominant political concepts of our times. All political violence now is looked at through an interpretive glasses of terrorism, and I don't have time to explain it, but let me just suggest to you that everything that a government tells you about terrorism is a lie, is propaganda. So, of course, I've been a big critic of George Bush and now President Obama and their wars on terrorism, and that has caused me to catch a few barbed arrows of outraged right-wing opinion, including death threats and calls that I should be fired and that kind of thing. I've also been involved in studying the impact of the drone, unmanned aerial vehicle attacks. And as an anthropologist, I'm interested in, the grassroots reality, the bottom-up reality instead of the top-down one. And again, I don't have time to explain it, but let me suggest to you that they have killed in excess of 2,500 innocent people with the drones, and that's just outright murder. So again, most of what you're told about the drones is a top-down version from the governments that employ them, and it's lies as well. And surprisingly there, while the United States government is not happy with what I've written about the drones, the U.S. Army quite likes me. I don't know whether that's because the U.S. Army doesn't fly the drones and therefore is envious of the money being spent on the Air Force for these weapons, that they aren't getting any. But I published 2 articles in Military Review, which is probably the world's leading military journal, on that, criticizing the lies told about the drone program. More recently, I've been involved in the anti-TPPA protest, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is also a big lie that you're being told about. And what trade agreements do is they enrich the 1% and impoverish everyone else. As you probably all know, the gap between the rich and the poor has gotten wider and wider and wider, especially in the last 15 or 20 years. And that is in direct corollary with the enactment of all of these free trade agreements. Now, the government would have you believe there's no connection between those two things. In fact, they would argue that the opposite is the result of them. But all the research shows that the free trade agreements do not benefit our economy. And if they do produce a little bit of economic growth, which they may do, that 99% of that economic growth will go to the top 1%. But the bottom part of our country, the bottom 33% will actually, their wages and things will decline as a result of these free trade agreements. So I think that's more than 5 minutes right there. So hi. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you get yellow carded at 4, and yeah.
5.5.
Yeah. Oh, 8. Yeah, goodness me, that was amazing. Fit into 4 minutes. So it's being recorded as well, and will be uploaded to YouTube. So make sure you revisit it and send it out. Dr. Satna Summit.
Kia ora tātou. This is my first speaking gig, so I have a piece of paper with me to refer to from time to time. So a little bit about me, ko Sapna Aho, ko, sorry, I might forget, ko Himalaya Mauna, or maybe Western Ghats, probably from the western part of India, and ko Arabian Sea Moana. So you could locate me from the western part of India, western coast. That is where my native place is. And I'm from Bombay, Maharashtra. I came to New Zealand 13 years ago, in December 2001. I never left, except to visit India and to travel overseas. I used to be a doctor back in India, a GP, practiced for a long time. By the time I came here, I was really bored of practicing medicine. I needed to explore other parts of my brain. So I got a master's degree in film, television, and media studies from the University of Auckland. Freelanced for Radio New Zealand for a long time. Started my own little production company called Holy Cow Media Limited in 2006. And this was, for me, a response to the lack of diversity and minority stories within the New Zealand creative scape. I found it really, it made me angry that I was doing this, that there were no stories being told about us by our people. Instead, we were being exoticized on Sunday morning, on television, exoticized and otherized, and it was always about food, clothes, and dance. So Holy Cow Media was started as a response against that. The idea is to tell stories that fall through the cracks that nobody wants to fund. I made my first documentary film, the only one so far, in response to the Diwali festival that is organized by Asian New Zealand Foundation and in those days Auckland City Council, which is an exercise for Pakeha people to feel good about themselves that they are being multicultural in New Zealand. It is about Bollywood dancing, it is about food, it is about otherizing, it is about telling people that, oh look, we have such a large Indian community, aren't we lucky that we are giving them space over here to live and do whatever they want to do. But there were no conversations around integration, there were no pertinent conversations around settlement, there was no dialogue happening about, certain pieces of cultural baggage, domestic violence that does happen in the community, that issues of dowry do happen in the community. There's religious, there's Hindus and Muslims from India who sort of don't talk to each other, and none of that discourse was happening around the time of Diwali. And so I made a documentary film, which you can watch on Vimeo. It took me about 3 or 4 years to make because I had a little camera and I would, self-funded. So just drive from one end of Auckland to the other, filming these little groups. So that was my first documentary. I tried to pitch it. It didn't go through to festivals, but I was able to present it at different academic seminars across the country and write about the idea of multiculturalism, what I call is multiculturalism 101, which is how, we're stuck in the 70s still. Right, 2 minutes. Anyway, so then I made another film, which is currently doing the rounds of the short film festival circuit in the United States, which was in response to, again, about minorities and diaspora and diversity to the Korean community in New Zealand. And if you can ask me questions about it later if you wish. But it is about the loneliness and isolation of the Koreans who come here unable to speak English. It was my personal response because I don't know if you remember the story that happened in Christchurch where a woman committed suicide and then her daughters and her in a couple of years ago. And I felt that if this is me as a perfectly English-speaking person felt isolated and lonely in this country because of the color of my skin and ethnicity, how is it that somebody who doesn't speak English, how do they feel? So that was my response to that incident, and that's the film that I made. Apart from that, I'm currently back into medicine because I worked in the refugee communities as a volunteer, and I was encouraged to go back to medicine because I was told that, you have strong intercultural skills, so I think I do. So I'm now currently in training, starting my third run at Wellington Hospital. But before that, I worked as a GP for a year at Cannons Creek in Porirua. So to me, all my work, whether it is medicine or whether it is filmmaking or storytelling or anything, is around the idea of diversity. And I see that diversity needs to be a value that's embedded, and the Treaty of Waitangi pretty much encompasses that. This is how I look at myself, and this is how I interpret the treaty, and how we can actually talk about diversity as a value in New Zealand, and then work around that in our personal lives and through the work that we do. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Sapna. And we have Ani Parata in next week's forum who'll be talking a little bit more about that through a Māori perspective. So next speaker is Councillor Guru Nathan. Thank you.
Te he Māori ora, e ngā iwi, e ngā mana, e ngā rio, tēnā rā koutu, tēnā koutu, tēnā koutu katoa. Shagodri le, in the New Zealand Matara Kapikos Makaz, Varga and Alakere. I'll start by telling you two stories. Back in 1987 in Malaysia, when I was working as the editor for the opposition paper, The Rocket, there was a government-initiated crackdown on opposition party leaders, NGO activists, even Christian evangelists. The paper kept producing. And just 1 month later, I was summoned by Special Branch in Kuala Lumpur. It was a classic situation, a dark room, 2 police officers, and as I came in, they said, "Sit down, Mr. Gurunathan." I thought that I may not come out of that room, that I will just be an addition to the list. But it was an interesting conversation. They said, "Mr. Gurunathan," they said, "we know you're a good journalist. We analyze your pieces. We have men who trained in Sweden, apparently, on content analysis." They said, you're writing appeals to the middle class intellectuals. We don't care about them. At the most, they are only armchair revolutionaries, perhaps like ourselves here. I mean you lot and me. But he said, "But your recent piece has caused us some concern." The piece that I'd written was a piece on the then Minister for Public Works. In Malaysia, if you are a Minister for Public Works, which means you have a personal bank account which is very fat. And the piece that I'd written was this. I realized from my other opposition MPs in Parliament that this minister would go around and boast to everybody, say, "Look, I'm going to America for this operation. It's a hair transplant. The gentleman was getting bald. So he used to go to America frequently for hair transplant operations." I don't know how much that costs. But I thought and said, I'll write this piece. See, amongst Tamils, this chap was Tamil just like me. We are very particular about hair. The hair that mudi comes from the head, Mairu comes from other parts of the visible body. Masru is hair that's associated with excretory functions. And I put in my paper, I want the readers to decide where, from which part of his body he has transplanted his hair from. Now, in Tamil culture, this is a huge insult because the head is tapu, like among Maoris. But I was calculated because I'd written it in the English language. If this was in a Tamil paper, it would be incendiary. Now, what happened was, he said, "Look," the guys, the 2 police officers said, "Look, if you agitate the people, you are causing us work. Because did you know there were people who are going to go after you, and we had to stop them because this minister's henchmen were very good. Their modus operandi towards people who agitated him or who he opposed to him was 2 guys on motorcycles will stop somewhere where you are and they'll throw acid on your face." Now, and then, after this, they told me, the officers told me, said, look, Mr. Gurunathan, I think we have finished this interview. You can leave now. I was so relieved. And as I was going out the door and there was lights, they asked, Mr. Gurunathan, I turned around and said, how's the family? And I said, oh, very good. I was so relieved. I thought it was really good. They were concerned about me. As I left, took the lift down, I was troubled. I went down to the coffee shop and had the Chinese coffee shop, had my first coffee, hit me. This is a threat to the family. And so, when I went back, I wrote to a well-known NGO leader and told him, look, if anything happens to me, this is what's taking place. I wrote to the to the New Zealand High Commission and said, look, I'm married to Kiwi, and if something happens to me, your responsibility are over them. But I think it is important to realize the statement that they made. If you are middle class, they are not bothered. We may want to explore that. And the other thing is, how many minutes have I got?
Oh, 2.
2 minutes. The second story is this. 1995, Malaysia had they were given the ability to have the Commonwealth Games in Kuala Lumpur in 1998. The police started cracking down on making Kuala Lumpur clean. One of the things they used to do is send the trucks down and drag out all the drug addicts in the back lanes. And at that time, I was leading the special issues desk of a daily English paper called The Sun. The photographer and myself went, and things I saw, because in the paper, the Inspector General of Police, Rahim Noor, called them and said, these are binatang, which means they are animals. And what I saw there was exactly right. The police officers in gloves just picking up these poor buggers and just chucking them into the trucks. And I saw an amazing thing. There's one guy emaciated, unable to stand up. There was another guy equally so, but he was able to stand. He was asked, and the guy on the floor was asking, "Bang!" He said, "Brother, help me." And this guy turned around and picked him up to go because they didn't want to be chucked in there. I didn't see animals. I saw humanity. And when I came back, I wrote my column and I described what has happened. And I said, the police officer, the Inspector General of Police had spoken when he said they're binatang like a true cattle trader. And the word cattle trader in the Malay language, is also an insult to a person of high stature like himself. Next day, I had 2 police officers come to the office and say, our boss is very upset. He wants to, I explained to them because I knew I was frightened. I said, what's happened? They came back and phoned me and said, look, the police officer, he's not happy, my boss is not happy, you have to come. My desk was already scared. So anyway, I said, no, I'll go. I went the next day to the police, 16th floor, but luckily as I came in, one of my colleagues, female reporter, she said, look, I'm worried, I'll come with you. Went up. The moment I came to the office, he was barking. He told me, he said, you stand. He said, who are you? He said, you sit down here, you stand. I had to stand while he was barking. And I knew if the other reporter wasn't there, he would have hit me. And I did not know what else would have happened. But from that day, I was scared. He showed me his huge file and he said, look, we are marking you and stuff like that. I was really petrified. For the next 2 weeks, whenever I had a motorbike to travel through, I checked my motorcycle because a small statue of heroin or something stashed inside there, it would be the death penalty for me. I was so scared. So the challenge is this: how deeply are we committed to our ideals when there is threat like this? I don't know. I was shit scared. If they had taken me, tortured me, would my ideals still stand? I don't know. So welcome to New Zealand, where you have the ability to speak up. And if you don't, it's a terrible insult to all those people who face the fear of death, the families, the members, and everything. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And obviously Guru is now a councillor for the Kapiti Coast District Council, so come a long way.
That's a beautiful experience.
And the first red card of the day as well.
Where I'm comfortable, brother.
I'm sorry it's such a whirlwind, but we're trying to cram a lot in here. So thank you all for your patience, and thank you everyone. So we will bring Gayleen on obviously when she comes in, and I just have a question that I'd like to ask. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm kind of obsessed with climate change, and I've been working with sustainability for a really, really long time. And I'm reading this book by Naomi Klein called This Changes Everything, which is about climate change. In it, so this is my question to you. I'm going to read a little bit from the book. It's a big one. In it, she says this. She says, "Our economic system and our planetary system are now at war. What the climate needs to avoid collapse is a contraction in humanity's use of resources. What our economic model demands is unfettered expansion. Only one of these sets of rules can be changed, and it's not the laws of nature. Either we will change our ways and build an entirely new kind of global society, or they will be changed for us. That's tough for a lot of people in important positions to accept, since it challenges something that might be even more powerful than capitalism, and that is the fetish of centrism, of reasonableness, seriousness, splitting the difference, and generally not getting overly excited about anything. Climate change presents a profound challenge to this cautious centrism, because half measures won't cut it. The firm deadlines imposed by science require that we get very worked up indeed. So my question is, do you agree that it's time we get very worked up indeed? And if so, how does one do that without taking up arms?" So, Jeff, would you like to?
Well, I think Naomi Klein is right, and I think that this is what I teach in my classes at Massey. Humankind currently faces the greatest challenge, the greatest crisis that our species has ever faced on this planet. Our current government basically doesn't believe in climate change. They grudgingly accept it's a scientific reality but aren't prepared to do anything about it. Many national MPs believe it's a hoax. The idea that there's global climate change is a hoax. The current global population is over 7 billion. I think that when I started teaching at the university level, it was 5 billion. It's going to go to probably 10 billion, and fingers crossed the lifetime of most of you in the audience. Not only, therefore, when we anthropologists look on an evolutionary or historical scale, what we see is a timeline of a long, many thousand-year-long timeline of very slow population growth until the Industrial Revolution, which was only 250 years ago, and then it went right through the roof. It just goes straight through the roof. So not only has this massive increase in global human population gone up through the roof, but the degree of consumption of each of those individuals has gone up at the same time. So not only do we have more and more people, but each individual is going to consume more and more and more. And that's what all of our governments are totally dedicated to, is growing consumption. The only solution the National Party and probably the Labour Party as well have to our problems is economic growth. And economic growth, they see it as the fundamental solution to our problems. But as Naomi Klein has pointed out in her books, that growth is actually the fundamental problem that we're facing. It cannot simultaneously be the solution. Now, having given that very, very frightening scenario, just to say something positive, what we know as anthropologists is that all of these problems were created by people. And any problem people created, they can uncreate and change. We do have the power to change it. We could change it. It isn't the policy of our government right now to change it, but therefore it's our job and our challenge to get the government to take it seriously and do something about it. On a positive side, yes, we can do that. And the other thing about it is it's darn fun. You know, you can either live in fear and just kind of keep your head down and hope that we'll all each shuffle off this mortal coil before some terrible catastrophe happens in our lifetime. Or you can join the good fight. And you know what? It's good fun to join the good fight. It actually is better than watching TV, more fun than watching TV, the great brain killer in our society. It may possibly not only, it will certainly make your life more fun and more interesting. It will certainly, if there's going to be a future for your children and your grandchildren, it'll certainly contribute to that. So while we face terrible problems, you say, as Naomi Klein says, get involved to do something about it. And you shouldn't just do it because you're frightened of the terrible things that are happening in the world, but because, as I say, it's great fun. You'll meet great people. It'll give you something to do with your life that's maybe more productive, as I say, than watching TV for 4 or 5 hours every night, or no insult to the cricket, but going to the cricket game or something like that. And it doesn't cost anything. It's one of the cheapest hobbies available to us. And especially the audience that I see here, there is a mass of wisdom in this room that goes along with the experience. I don't want to say anything about age, but the fact is that there's a massive experience in our population among people that are a little bit older, and there's a good chance for you to pass some of that wisdom on. We live in a capitalist culture. It wants to throw it away so that you'll buy some new wisdom. But instead of that, let's use the wisdom that we have. It's the most powerful people in our society, I believe, right now are older people. We tend to all say, it's going to be the youth, it's going to be the youth. And they will be, but when they'll be powerful? When they reach your age. That's what. So what we need is the people that have experience and understand the issues and maybe want to be involved in it, to do so and help save the world. If there's going to be a world after us, it's going to be because you and I do something about it. So just one more thing, I don't want to monopolize the time. But they want you to think that you're powerless because you think, I'm not Bill Gates. I don't have millions of dollars. I'm not a famous politician. What can I do? Nothing has ever been achieved by humankind except that thousands and thousands of people added a drop to the bucket. We're taught a kind of history of great men and great women who have done, but each of them built the things that they did on the backs of thousands and thousands of people. So how we achieve things is we ask everyone to add a drop to the bucket, not a whole bucket. And don't think that just a drop in the bucket isn't going to have an effect. It absolutely does. That's the only way human beings have ever achieved anything, is that many, many, many people have each added their own drop, whatever drop they can add. Maybe you can add $10 to the donation. Maybe you can talk to your kids. Maybe you can attend a meeting or a march. Add a drop to the bucket, and you'd be surprised what we can achieve.
So no, I wasn't necessarily meaning that we get very worked up about climate change, although I do think we should all get very worked up about climate change, but more about the issues that you feel passionately about. How does one get worked up about them without breaking furniture?
Well, I'm a big follower of Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela as well. So non-violence, and anger is also violence. So if we have to get angry, then we have to try and channel it in a positive way. It takes a lot of self-awareness, not in this lifetime probably, to continue to practice it. Yes, I do worry about climate change. India and China, it's just non-stop. Growing populations, needing more and more consumption. I'm going to India in March, and I sort of dread it because when I go there, I look at consumption and I say, I don't really need all of this stuff. And then people over there think I'm a bit nuts because why am I not consuming? Because, the idea of living in the West is being a consumer. And when I say to them, I possibly buy stuff from second-hand shops or hand-me-downs, not all the time because there's a balance. It's not really understood why you have to do that, because the idea is to earn a lot of money and to consume and then maybe spend a weekend at a retreat that is really, really expensive and far away from the urban areas. But, that's who cares what happens everywhere else. So it is a bit of a worry, and to me, I want to do it through my storytelling and constantly talking about it, passing it on to the next generation, and baby boomers, all you guys, Jeff is right. So much wisdom needs to be filtered back into the younger people, your grandchildren, I guess. So I try not to, I get angry and then I have a moment of take a deep breath, don't get angry, don't get violent, think of innovative ways to keep talking about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Satna. $6 from Tawa Salvation Army. So I'm going to read this one. This is from Arundhati Roy this time, which I wasn't going to read, but I am going to because it's about passion and anger. This is from her latest book, I think. She says, when people try to dismiss those who ask the big public questions as being emotional, it is a strategy to avoid debate. Why should we be scared of being angry? Why should we be scared of our feelings if they're based on facts? The whole framework of reason versus passion is ridiculous because often passion is based on reason. Passion is not always unreasonable. Anger is based on reason. They're not two different things. She feels it's important to defend that, to defend the space for feelings, for emotions, for passion. She's often accused of the crime of having feelings. But I'll speak as her, but I'm not pretending to be a neutral academic. I'm a writer. I have a point of view. I have feelings about things I write about, and I'm going to express them, which I really like. I think it's fantastic. So, Guru, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but thank you.
No, I'm not going to comment on whether anger is good or bad.
Can I just 1 second, sorry?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Arundhati Roy called Mahatma Gandhi a terrorist. No, which is it's a good debate to have because you cannot just put somebody on a pedestal and say this is unchallenged. And so if we are challenging his views and then re-looking at them, it's probably really good. But, so that's her anger.
His movement wasn't non-violent either. There was violence, and not from him, but actually there was violence.
I think it's my turn.
Sorry. You were the only real part.
No, I drive.
No, but actually, that is my point. Is that Mahatma Gandhi, his movement did end up violent, and many of them that came with peaceful motives, Che Guevara and others, ended up calling to arms, and that's exactly my point because of climate change being such a massive issue that's not being heard about. So that's
my children call me the fat Gandhi. Okay. Now look, and Mahatma Gandhi's portrait or picture is now in all the Indian money. The whole capitalist system now is. What will you say about that? I don't know.
500 rupee note.
Yes.
So you
hey, look,
be a Gandhi.
For me, I drive a car, but I drive an old car which is not fuel efficient. But I cannot afford to buy the new cars which are fuel efficient. Having said that, I mean, the biggest fear now is the growing demand in China, in India, in the population that fueling it, and the growth of the middle class. And I had this debate with Robert Attack once. And I asked Robert Attack, do you drive a car? He said, yes. But what's that going to... I said, hang on, man. There are millions and millions of Chinese and Indians who also want to drive a car. And they are entitled to the same stupidity. They've got a democratic right to stupidity as everybody else, as the Western world. This is a difficult question. But I assiduously recycle. I compost. And I'm a great believer in public transport also, the infrastructure-wise, and the RONs and all that. It doesn't go down well with me, but I don't know, it's a dilemma, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do something or be advocate for the change, even though you yourself are part of the problem.
Thank you. We'll have an ongoing debate about that, I'm sure. So now I'd like to welcome Gayleen Preston. Thank you so much for making the time to come up, albeit late. And I've told the other panellists that I'm not going to preempt you by trying to put you into a box. I'll just let you talk about yourself. So thank you.
Inga mana, inga reo. Inga karangatanga o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I was asked to think of a person or people who had inspired me growing up and set me on a path. And actually, once I started thinking about it, there was far too many. There was English teachers, art teachers that went well beyond the call of duty, drama teachers, elocution teachers. There were, I've just got so many people in my life who have been important to me as I was growing up. So this is a working class girl, and I decided that really the most influential people in my life were the ones who came back from World War II, the thing we call World War II, who put in place in this country an amazing system. It was called a social security state, and I am the lucky recipient. I've prepared something here and I would like to actually read it, which is not usual for me. Usually I sort of riff on the subject, but I would like to read this. Yes, I'm part of a lucky generation who inherited a miracle. We are the country that lost a miracle. I was born in 1947. I'm a peace baby. Straight after the war, they danced in the streets here in Wellington when the atom bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't know. Hindsight's a great thing, but I've grown up in the shadow of that terrible man-made disaster. And so has the rest of my generation. But as the wars rage, I'm lucky enough to be born in a place on the edge of it all. We used to look at the map. When we were little kids, we'd look at the map and we'd find New Zealand. It was generally under the printer's mark. And we'd find New Zealand and we'd be so pleased that it was pink, because there was actually quite a lot of the rest of the world that was sort of pinkies. So that kind of made our little hearts swell with pride, and we all went out and waved when the Queen came. I'm remembering the veterans. When we have Anzac Day, I remember the veterans of the war that came back, and they put, for the next 30 years, whether they were right wing, left wing, however they saw themselves, they put in place, they continued a strong program of social reform. And I figure that they did that because they'd seen the world, that they were, if any of you have seen the film Country Lads, it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking from what was then the Prime Minister's Department that became the National Film Unit, and it talks about these soldiers slouching off to war, country lads. They were clever. They weren't particularly educated, a lot of them, but they were very clever and they could make things go. And when they came back, they put in place a social security state, jobs for all, reusable, sustainable energy, a single-tier free health system with preventative community-based focus. I mean, anyone my age will remember the clump up the corridor that made you shake in your boots, of the district nurses arriving in their Morris Minors, and we'd all have to go and stand in the corridor in just our singies while our chests were checked and we said and any kids who were not well were, I mean, the health camp just along the road here, they came back to school not white and skinny and with sores. They came back to school brown and confident. That's the world I grew up in. The dental clinic right there at the school. We called it the murder house, but it actually means that a lot of us, our age, baby boomers, we actually still have our own teeth. My mother lost her teeth at 23. Most of her generation did. As a precocious, talkative 5-year-old, I arrived at school where I was given a play-based, child-based primary school education. We didn't have endless testing. If we did, we certainly weren't aware of it. A big paintbrush was pushed into my hand. I was suddenly facing a big blank piece of newsprint with yellow and green and red paint. I was encouraged to express myself when I got to school. We did all that. We learned all those sort of strange folk dances, and we played the recorder madly, and we made plays up, and we wrote stories, and most importantly, we learned to work with one another. That was my primary school education, and that primary school education was no accident. It was put in place very particularly between 1935 and the 60s. My parents left school at 13. Actually, I think my father left school at 11. He was down at Cobden Beach being a surfie. All his children were educated for free to tertiary level, from primer to PhD for free. So I'm the lucky recipient. And I mean, the thing about that is it's not just me, it's a whole generation. I came to this country in a moment, and I've grown up in it in a moment. I come from here, but what I mean is I was born into the world in a moment in our country's history when the social security state fostered and fast-tracked an educated middle class. Thousands of sturdy, sunny state houses were built. My art school buddy, Bill Hammond, he grew up in one. It's pretty much next door to John Key's one, but Bill and the Hammonds were really pleased about theirs. They loved their brand new state house. By the late 50s, early 60s, New Zealand had the smallest gap between rich and poor and the largest per capita income in the world. Nil unemployment, that means under 2% unemployed. So I am the lucky recipient, and so are we all, baby boomers, the lucky recipients. But we live in an amnesiac age. Lest we forget, every Anzac Day I remember the generation that returned and fostered that world that I grew up in. The can't afford it culture has kicked in. It's a culture of immediacy, bottom line thinking, and how we lost that miracle is something, a sad process, and I don't think we want to go into it, and we'll all have our own versions of it. But there's one thought that if we could just all agree on one thing, I rack my brains, I think, what's the one thing that could unite us all? Because, I read some essays, Doris Lessing, where she was talking about, if you took all the people who wanted to look after other people and you put them in a big circle and they held hands, and you took the others who didn't want to look after anyone and were just after themselves, this group here would be much smaller. Much, much smaller than the big group that want to be together. But of course, we always have to argue a lot about how we do that. But I'm thinking, what is the one thing that we could all just agree on? And I think even this lot over here could agree with this, which is, we're only as strong as our weakest link. I mean, I think if you go to war in an army, you get to understand that pretty well, pretty fast. You're only as strong as your weakest link. It's a physical fact. It's actually irrefutable. It's a psychological group reality. It's an overwhelming social truth. So, it's the basis of the social security state. I've got them: free healthcare, preventative intervention, free education, jobs for all, social housing and welfare to help in hard times, which makes so much sense when you've got full employment. That's economic policy, and they put that in place in the middle of a large financial global meltdown. If they did it, we've got to believe that somehow we can do it. I'd like to think that we could put the miracle back for our grandchildren. It can't be too late. So here's my personal motto. Nō reira, live better, help often, wonder more. Kia ora.
I think we can all go home now. That was wonderful, Galen. Thank you so much. So now we'll open it up. Can I take this off, James? Is that, yeah. And, if you just want to, we're at the end of time, but we've got to go anyway. So if you've got any questions, you can either address them to the entire panel, or if you've got a particular person that you want to ask something, then please feel free to. So,
Amanda. Just a question for you, Guru Nathan. You were talking about how they are not afraid of the middle class. Is that what you said or what you meant? And could you? I'm upset they're not afraid of us.
Yeah.
I want to know what we can do to make them afraid of us, and who are they afraid of?
Well, a couple of things to put it into frame. The statement was made by the Special Branch Officer within the context of Malaysia. And basically he was saying the middle class intellectuals don't frighten them. It is when the ideas are being agitated to the working class or the average man. So if you are talking to the middle class, if you then start talking, so what it means was the middle class did matter. The middle class intellectuals are important. Otherwise they wouldn't have called me in, because I fitted into the category. So when you can communicate not just to the middle classes, intellectuals, but you can communicate to the others, because every revolutionary movement, every new wave, you need the ideas people. So it is within that context. And that's why if they thought otherwise, they wouldn't have called me in. Okay. They were only fearful of the ability of the middle class intellectuals to communicate the idea to the others effectively enough. Not only to be subversive in the sense that you undermine what the status quo ideas are, but also the subversion should be in a way that it incites action, possibilities, potential avenues of action.
So what we take from that is ways that, if we think of ourselves as an intellectual with information, how do we reach other people who are not thinking?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Nigel? Oh, you don't need that.
Just a question for Galen. You're saying that as a society we are as strong as our weakest link. It seems to me the problem is that I would suggest that the weakest link in this country right now is the Prime Minister, who has really significant power. And the weakest links on a social scale seem to be those who have the most power. And that, I guess, is what you're addressing here.
That's an interesting thing. I would have said the weakest links are the people who haven't got access to social services. The weakest links are the men who are in prison. We're really good at that. You know, I think that the weakest links in our society are the people who go around doing burglaries because they've got, because there's, the weakest link to me is the fifth generation poverty line welfare beneficiary. I think those are the weakest links. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the Prime Minister, but I don't think I perceive him to be weak. I actually perceive him to be absolutely, ruthlessly, with an iron grip, holding power and money to himself. The weakest links in our society are the very young and the very old, and the uneducated and the dispossessed, and the children who grow up without two parents really being able to look after them because everybody's having to work all the time. It's a middle class problem also. And we need to look after those areas, and we're not. We're actually separating them out into little sort of silos. So the ministry's work is silos. There's very little cross pollination goes on between the ministry of this and the ministry of that. So I just think we can't even, when we have an earthquake, we can't even kind of rebuild and look after the welfare of the people. They did that in 1931. But somehow our lives, our whole social, the mechanics of how we operate in New Zealand are so globalised now that everything's so complicated that we can't do much. So I think, it's at the community level and in our own lives that we need to embrace this thing, because, if you want to put a social security state idea in place, you can start, and you can start in your own homes with your own neighbours and just start. And it involves tolerance, and it involves an argument, being able to have one without getting angry. When I say, I make all my films from a point of rage. I work from a point of rage. A lot of artists do. We're surrounded today by brilliant work that has come from a point of rage. And I think, as I only heard a little bit of previous speakers, but I think a point of rage is really important. I've just come from a week at Parihaka, where they certainly know the meaning of holding a point of rage and standing steadfast. That's what we have to do. We have to stand steadfast and listen and be tolerant. But I'm sure I'm talking to a completely to an audience that's already well aware of all of this.
I don't know. No, you don't. But is it a general one or general question? Or?
To Galen, yeah. Another question for Galen was statement, perhaps a suggestion, is that I think people can hear me. No, go on. If it's a statement, hold it too close.
No, I think that what we need to do is to state the moral right of all people to be able to have enough food, to be able to care for their children, and to have a place to live. And I think that we need to state that all the time, the moral right of everyone to have that, of what we have.
Do any of the other speakers want to address that? Yeah, Jeff? Has anyone got any? Yeah, at the back there.
Hi there, Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Jen Carpley, and I would just like to say that what this woman has said is, in my opinion, absolutely correct and absolutely crucial to where our community goes from where we are. A lot of us baby boomers and the ones who were born in the generations after that, as Gaining has said, we absolutely benefited from the social security state. And what did we do? We then let it run through our fingers, and now people who should be benefiting as we did do not, because we didn't hang on to it. In 1991, the social security laws were attacked, and they've been attacked ever since. I remember at that time that our government sent people from New Zealand to America to find out how they housed the vulnerable, how we could change our housing system. And here we are, and now we house our vulnerable just as America does on the streets. Yeah. And I think very much like Gaining says, it is those of us of the generations who have benefited by the social security system that we must now put that back into place for the people who are coming after us.
Could I connect it? Yeah, thank you. You're so right. And it's been so hard to stop this momentum. You could call it a pendulum, you can call it what you like. But I mean, in the end, my grandmother, she brought up 5 children on a house on stilts above the Blaketown Lagoon. When it flooded, the water came through the floorboards. She had no social security. She had to clean schools. My mother left school and would walk barefoot over in the Barber, which any of you know Greymouth, it's pretty cold, and go and help her mother clean the schools in order to get some money. Because my grandfather was an alcoholic. He died on the streets in Dunedin. So, I mean, the problem is, us baby boomers, we were so privileged, we didn't actually associate all these great riches that we were given with social welfare. But of course, social welfare is a very broad thing, and we have lost it. But I do think that we have to. There's 4.2 million people in New Zealand now. 25% of our children are being born under the officially sanctioned poverty line. 4.5 million people. With all this big country, that's less than how many people live in Melbourne. I mean, really, we could do something about this. When they say, oh, the government's really good at managing the economy, I mean, unfortunately, because of terms like, we have to watch our language, terms like nanny state. My nan looked after us. She was great, you know. She brought us up while my parents worked. Basically, we need a nanny state. I think a nanny state's a great thing to have, and I think we've got to fight them back using their own language. And we must be able to do something about the 25% of our children that are born into poverty. We must. There's not many of us. There's a big country.
I'd actually like to say something. I know that the panel's not me officially, but anyway. So my thing is sustainability, and it's what I always say is that sustainability is actually a social science. It's not an environmental science because it's about our interactions with the planet. And it seems to me, with a mother who's a baby boomer, that what happened was she wanted to protect us, or they wanted to protect us, and the best way to do that was to make lots of money so that we could each have our own bedroom and things like that. And that's what's being perpetrated now, is that if you make lots of money, you're going to have a better life. And that's not the case, because we end up on the treadmill of wanting to make money, which doesn't actually give us a richer society at all. I've just finished reading something about after World War II, when there was rationing and how everyone was growing their own food, and this is in the UK, and how much healthier the society became as a result of it. And so the things that we think now are going to make our lives richer or better or, you know, famous or whatever it is, are not actually the things that are actually going to make our society as a whole a better place. And so also I wanted to address that I read recently a book about Osama bin Laden, and what he was actually most opposed to was the Western influence on his country. And so I'd really like Jeff to talk about Western culture and how it's influenced others, and why that's not necessarily, well, I'm going to say it's not a good thing. So.
I'd like to talk about that, but there were lots of people that had.
Sure.
I think might be better.
Sure.
Yeah, shall I? And if there's a little bit of time at the end, if you want to hear me talk about Osama bin Laden, but I know there were hands. There were people.
Sorry. So I go ahead.
If you don't mind, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So those of you that had your questions up before might want to. Yep.
If we're going to have any sort of revolution, political or otherwise, which will obviously need to change the situation, we're running out of time.
Another phone for
Yes. Go.
That must come, I believe, from the middle class. And our solution in New Zealand should be a political solution rather than a violent solution, and that again must come from the middle class. And we have a lot of people that aren't involved and don't choose to be involved in politics. And unless we can change that, we're going nowhere, because the middle class are being influenced by the current propaganda that is put out all the time, and they're not interested in changing anything. They don't care. They're all happy. They're all fine. They're not worried. So we need to address that somehow and get that message across, or otherwise we'll be in the same place in another 50 years.
I'd just like to argue, well, not argue against it, but to make us think about what exactly is a middle-class New Zealander. Who exactly is a middle-class New Zealander? Is it people like you, people like me, people like him? You know, because the fabric of New Zealand has changed so much. I came here 13 years ago, and I see the difference myself. I lived in Auckland for 11 years before I moved to Wellington. So I see the difference in that as well. There's, you know, Auckland is an Asian city, as a lot of people complain. So are those Asians middle-class New Zealand? And if so, if we agree with that, then how do we include that section of middle-class New Zealand in this discourse? Because by actually not telling their stories, not including them, not talking about what their lives are, we are not being inclusive. Yesterday on Radio New Zealand, there were two women panelists in the afternoons on Jim Morris' panel, and they were really boring because they were talking about themselves. And they were talking about Les Mills, and they were talking about their exercise class, and they were talking about a retreat, and they were talking about, oh my gosh, I did not have Wi-Fi at my retreat. I mean, this is... So I tweeted about it because I can get a bit angry, place of rage. So I said, what the hell? Pākehā women's boring conversation. Are they having coffee on Ponsonby Road? Because they were talking to each other. Okay, so how do you make a place where you're trying to be inclusive and get other people to talk about their other lives and not just the idea of, oh, this is middle-class New Zealand. You know what I mean? If I totally agree with what you're saying, but unless and until we also have that idea in our heads about how do we include all the people who are now migrated to New Zealand, are a huge part of New Zealand, how do we include them in the discourse and talk about social welfare state? I totally agree with that.
I'd just like to say that the way that we include everybody is we talk about the very basic things that don't involve race or sexuality or class. We talk about, as this woman did in the front, that every single human being in this country, regardless of who they are, needs to be and is entitled to what they need in order to survive, in order to be alive, and that is shelter and that is food. It doesn't matter who that person is or where they come from.
Oh, I agree with that. You know, there are certain things where you obliterate ethnicity, race, language, but you still need to include people who have migrated to this country into this discourse, because a lot of us who will come here, we want to have a life which is better than what we had back at home, which means we think only about ourselves. And I'm not saying this in a good way or bad way. This is just an observation, having worked in these communities. So we don't really, and I'm putting myself in that place, we don't really think about how the Treaty of Waitangi will affect us or what it really means to us. We don't really think about, and this is again perpetuated by the media, by the government, by political parties. I mean, I can tell you stories about how National and Labour approach ethnic communities, and I get very angry that none of the Asian MPs in Parliament have spoken about anything. They can't even string together a sentence that is publicly, people actually talk about what is going on in New Zealand. A couple of years ago, when the gay marriage bill was being debated, all the Asian MPs voted against it. A couple of them abstained. So I wrote to them and I said, why have you done this? Give us your reasoning. Melissa Lee did not bother to reply. Kulwant Bakshi gave me some bull about the Sikh holy book, which was argued against by another Sikh person. Raymond Coe, who was the Labour Party MP, he was influenced by people from the Chinese community to vote against it. And what's his name? Rajan Prasad. He abstained. Now, this person was a race relations commissioner or something like that, and he abstained, right? This was the first reading of the bill. And my argument is, we come here, we are a minority. Why are we treating people who are also a minority, why are we discriminating against them? There should be equality everywhere. And this is the kind of stuff when I say that when we want people to represent us, they should maybe guru when you go to Parliament. Why not? But this is because the argument is hijacked by these representatives of the people, rather than actually talking directly to them, including them in the discourse and saying, so what do you think of the budget? Have you ever asked any person from a migrant community what they think of the budget? Have we ever asked any people from the Muslim community, apart from the ones who are the spokesperson for FIANZ, have we ever asked them what it means to them to send troops to the Middle East and how it is going to affect their lives in New Zealand? We don't really talk to them. We have all these experts who are basically just intellectuals who are just talking to each other. But unless those people are included in the discourse, the idea of how do we change this country it's just going to be a conversation and nothing more.
Thanks. Now we'll do maybe 2 more questions, and we've gone way over time. So, Brent, did you have a question?
I suppose I always think of the film Pride and think about the idea of people going that this is really a collective response, and neoliberal capitalism has recruited us into a self-centred, just me, just look after me. And I think we have to keep on fighting all of those fights and looking just what you've said about that idea that we should interlink. And I think the only thing that someone said here, we've got 50 years, we haven't got 50 years. Climate change is such a risk. And they've gone to war against the planet. They're using the most dangerous forms of, environmentally destructive tar sands, fracking and things. Yeah. And Guru, you can drive your car, but you've got to choose which side you're on. And so when you do that little conversation, I think we've got to be careful about the side we're choosing. Are we choosing to stay with the neoliberal, let's kill the planet, or are we actually going, I'm not, yes, I have to drive my car, but I'm absolutely committed to bring about change, because I think our own personal guilt sort of tangles us up, and this is a political struggle, and everything's at risk. I've taken a year off work because it's the biggest crisis facing us, and I'm going to do something. I'm not going to be an armchair revolutionary anymore. I'm going to actually do things. So anyway.
That's really good, and I know you work for council with getting transport things for children, a whole range of stuff. I agree with you, but at the same time I recognize that I'm caught in the system. But just staying away from that, I'm talking about the other debate that's going on. I'm really interested in the conversation between the Pākehās and the Maoris. Because the ethnic communities, yes, but they are essentially a sideshow to this other bigger conversation. And what's worrying me is the growth, with the treaty settlements, the growth of the Maori Brown Table, where they have more in common with the Pākehās Brown Table than the rest of their own community. I mean, people have said, who's this chap, the former MP, Harawira, they used to curse him. I said, no, he represents the Maori underclass versus the Maori, the emerging Maori neoliberal capitalist class. And so I've got that support from. So this is important because I see, as an ethnic person, I see the treaty as an umbrella for the other ethnic communities who have come in the later wakas. Yes. And that's an important consideration in the conversation we're having.
Anyone else got anything?
I work in Wellington, and going down through the Wellington railway station, in the underpass there, you often see a person begging. And, you know, there was a young Maori woman there singing her heart out, off key, for food. And she wanted food. And she was there before Christmas a couple of months, and then again back in January and back in February. Not every single day. She was excluded from, I don't know what they call it, the food place, because she sort of cheated them or something. She had to pay $10 to sleep overnight somewhere in Wellington, so she had to beg to get the money to sleep. So there's something missing when we don't have people looking to help those people. You know, they're there and they're begging on the streets, and yet we don't actively have someone seeming to go and get them and rescue them, and we don't have a system. So do we have any political will to do that?
I work in the prison system, and I think a lot of the initiatives towards trying to assist people to make changes in their life are compromised by a lot of mask covering. So by government, not just government, NGOs, a whole lot of employers, so that the actual drive to make changes for people is constantly coming up against a barrier. And I suppose the question I constantly ask myself, am I better to be working towards change within the system or without? I'm really interested from the panel about what your thoughts are, how to move forward this. Well, for me, it's about working with men with violence, but you know, there's a whole range of issues here, and what are the most effective ways to work?
I just want to address that from my point of view, because I now work as a doctor. I worked in Cannons Creek for a year as a GP. You all know about Cannons Creek? Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's got the highest rate of rheumatic fever in the Western world. Yes, I can't quote you on I can't give you the exact source of that information, but Cannons Creek, you shouldn't be surprised. And why should it have to be like this? You know, there's terrible housing, there's a whole lot of other social issues over there. And this I had an inkling of when I was working in the media in Auckland before I went back to medicine, working in the refugee communities, doing my voluntary work and all of that stuff. And the more I worked on the outside, getting angry at all the people making decisions, I jumped at I didn't jump because it's 3 years of a lot of studying and lots of money towards all the tests that go to re-qualifying as a doctor. But I did take up that chance because I felt that if I came back into the system and I actually worked inside, what is it called? There's a word for it. Yeah, coal-face, that's right. If I actually worked over there, then I would be able to argue effectively for change rather than just be on the outside and say, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. And I have a friend who works for the Ministry of Health, and she looks after the primary healthcare sector, and she says to me that there is actually government has no money to make changes in the primary healthcare sector, and I argue with her. I'm working in the hospital now, but that's just a requirement, and I will go back into the community by the end of this year. Is that Well, that is where you need to make the change, and that is where the money should go, because we shouldn't be having all these people, when it's winter, when you have people just crowding into the hospital, people who are just overwhelming the tertiary system. I can now argue from the outside as well as the inside. I've chosen to work in the system because I think once I understand how they spend the money, how they actually, utilize it, and all the rubbish, all the people in the DHBs giving themselves pay rises for what? I don't know. When the money should be going towards the actual health care. I see that as a place where now I can leave the hospital, work as a GP, and actually argue about it to create a more effective system of where you put your money and trying to make the change, because none of the politicians can then turn around and say, oh, well, you basically don't know anything because you're just an outsider. So this is the way I'm trying to do it. I don't know if I will succeed, but, you can always raise your voice.
Can I have a little thing for that? I've been someone who worked in mental health for a long time. I know how hard it is working inside. And I think that those of us who are insiders who've become outsiders, or outsiders who become insiders, it's very important to be working inside the system, but I think you need a lot of support. Because it's hard. It's really hard. It's very hard to tog up and go into those prisons every day. It's really hard to argue the cause every day, because we're in an environment where everything gets broken into little fragments called issues. And even, I got a certain amount of criticism last year for making a piece of drama that didn't explore things as issues, but actually took some social drama to put it on the television. So I can't imagine what it's like to be arguing inside the system in 2015. So power to your elbow, breath to your heart. Make sure you get. One thing we can do as friends and neighbours and larger community is offer real support and understanding for the people who are working in the system. Kia ora.
I'm sorry, everyone, we're going to have to wrap it up there because we have gone half an hour over time. So I'm pleased that you all stayed for that time because it shows obviously you're interested. So I'll just finish up by thanking the wonderful speakers. We've got a little gift here for you all because they've done this free of time, free of resources, and we really appreciate it. So thank you. And also, just to remind you that there are forums every Saturday for the next 3 coming up, and also it's wonderful to host it here at Mahara. The environment that was created, I actually didn't set any of this up, so it's a nice place to have a foray like this. And there is a donation box for Mahara on your way out, which would be great if you could see your way to help them with their upgrade and permanent housing of some big exhibitions as well as further events like this. Yep.
Are you aware of the TPPA marches on the 7th of March when you have the next?
Oh, we did our best, Liz. So I'll just finish up with one last quote from my dictionary at the moment. So Naomi Klein. And it's actually really pertinent to the last question about how we do the things that we do, whether we're inside the tent or whether we're outside the tent. And it's something I've thought about a lot myself as well. And we need all of us. As Peter Healy said on the cover of the program there, it takes all of us. Oh, what is it? It takes
everybody to change everything.
Yeah, to change everything we need everybody. And I'll finish with this. Politicians aren't the only ones with the power to declare a crisis. Mass movements of regular people can declare one too. Slavery wasn't a crisis for British and American elites until abolitionism turned it into one. Racial discrimination wasn't a crisis until the civil rights movement turned it into one. Sex discrimination wasn't a crisis until feminism turned it into one. Apartheid wasn't a crisis until the anti-apartheid movement turned it into one. In the very same way, if enough of us stop looking away and decide that climate change is a crisis worthy of response, then it will become one. So thank you, everyone.